For more than 50 years, innovation has been at the heart of Intel. From campuses to hospitals, battlefields to the stars above, we are trusted by our partners to meet their mission challenges head-on, accomplish their goals, and improve lives across the globe. Guided by ubiquitous computing, pervasive connectivity, cloud-to-edge infrastructure, AI and sensing, we ensure our partners are capitalizing on the full power of digital technology to drive mission success. With a commitment to U.S.-based manufacturing, we are on the forefront of cutting-edge solutions that lead to a more responsible, inclusive, sustainable, and technology-enabled world. Achieve your mission faster, more efficiently, and more securely with Intel.
We'll go ahead and get started. I'll just note that there will be a break after this panel session, and we'll have some refreshments available for our break. Again, I want to thank Dr. John Beeler for joining us today and helping to set the stage for today's discussion. He certainly gave us a lot to think about. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of our next panel, AI Ready, Challenges from Data-Centric Viewpoint. Teresa Smetzer is our moderator today, and she's chair of INSA's Technology and Innovation Council, and she's the CEO of Smetzer Associates, which is an independent consultancy that supports national security mission innovation. For more than 30 years, she's been a trailblazer, enabling the evolution of national security missions across public and private sectors. During her tenure at CIA, Teresa served as the Director of Digital Futures in the Directorate of Digital Innovation, where she stood up an intelligence outpost for critical partnerships with the private sector to incubate experiments and prototypes to mission-hard problems. Please join me in welcoming Teresa Smetzer.
Thank you, John. Very kind words, which I appreciate. So I'm so excited for this panel today. I think it's going to be kind of revolutionary in the sense that the reality that data is everything is finally kind of hitting. And so I'm anxious to hear the panel's representation of what they're doing, but also eager to get your questions. So as we're talking, please feel free to write your questions down and move those forward. So the panel today is called AI Ready, Challenges from a Data-Centric Viewpoint. I would note, I went to South by Southwest last month. I live in Austin, so I almost always go. And I was struck this year, not surprisingly, with the dominance of AI-related discussions, panels, you name it. And whether it was ethical issues or governance issues or new approaches that were disrupting industries of all sort, it was really a big shift from the previous year where AI was important, but not to the level that I saw this year. I also heard a number of people talking about this idea that AI and data really have merged into one, and you can't really think about the two as independent things anymore, which I thought was sort of interesting. The reality is there's an enormous amount of money going into, investment money going into artificial intelligence, into particularly generative capabilities, but really it's across the board. The same sort of thing we're seeing with academia, where fundamental research to get at some of the challenges and opportunities with AI. So those things will benefit the government ultimately, but I think for our panel today, government is really quite different than industry. And so I think that's a really important point. From a data-centric point of view, the IC needs to focus on critical and core components for AI implementation at speed and scale: data, IT infrastructure, cloud computing, talent management, and of course, investment in AI capabilities. Companies in the private sector don't really have some of those same challenges. So these are things that the IC and the government in particular really has to focus on. So that's what our panel is going to be oriented around today, is questions that relate to building out those foundational capabilities to be able to do AI at speed. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Despite what your agenda says, INSA was very prompt in shifting from Lori Wade to Marie Falkowski, and now we're back to Lori Wade. So the good news is Lori could join us after all. She is the IC Chief Data Officer. She's also Assistant DNI for Data and Partnership Interoperability. She oversees the strategic initiatives to reimagine the future of the IC's data landscape. I've known Lori for a long time. She was at CIA before as the Deputy Chief Data Officer at CIA. She served a number of positions as the DDI rep to the Mission Center, so she has a strong mission understanding. And so she's really in a perfect position to lead the IC data effort. Bruce Bauman is from NSA, the Central Security Service, where he's the Chief Data Officer there. And Bruce is responsible for data governance and data standards and maximizing the utility of data while also protecting it. It's a tough balancing act, I'm sure. Bruce has a career of data-related experiences across NSA, and so is very well positioned for this opportunity. Mark Munsell. Oh, I'm going to go a little backwards, sorry. Mark Munsell is NGA's Director of Data and Digital Innovation Directorate. Previously, he was the CTO at NGA and also was the Deputy Director CIO for IT Services. And Mark has a very long history of innovation across the board in various capacities for at least as long as I've known him. We have an industry representative in Brandy, Durham. Brandy is with ManTech, and she's the VP for AI practice there, where she is responsible for strategy, execution, implementation. Before ManTech, she served at AWS, Microsoft, and IBM, so has a broad set of experience in AI-related organizations, which will be quite helpful. And she will focus more on the IC sort of from an industry perspective, but has a lot of experience with customers as well. So with that, we're going to run through 6 or 7 questions that we've pre-staged that we'll get responses from all of our panelists. Please do write down your questions as the panel proceeds, and we'll leave at least 10 or 15 minutes at the end so that our panelists can answer questions. So with that, let's start with the first question, and it's for Lori. You've often stated that the IC is a data organization, something we've recently heard from the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Dr. Dixon, repeat publicly. She's definitely adopted that sort of point of view. Would you describe what you mean by that and how it impacts the IC readiness from a data-centric point of view?
Well, first of all, thanks, Teresa. Happy to be here. Happy to be with everyone. Glad my schedule shifted back so that I could come. That was great. Yeah, this is something that is core to the mentality and that pivot that it was necessary for the intelligence community, because we've experienced a long history and enjoyed a long history of just thinking of ourselves as collection and analysis. There's always this talk about collection and analysis. And having been in and around the intelligence community since 1998, I've seen us go through these different machinations and where those things have shifted. And really, at the core, what we're trying to do is that data-centric experience for the user, for the analyst, for the targeter, for the warfighter, for the data scientist. What are we about, right? The word intelligence itself starts with data, right? And just by definition, data then with context becomes information, then analyzed, right, for actionable becomes knowledge, and then actionable intelligence. And so by changing the mindset about what we are as an organization, and that we're a data organization. We also have within that tech organizations, right? And with this movement over the last many years, And I date back to working iSight, was the Mission Capabilities Group Chief for iSight, where we talked about the data layer, right, and moving up that stack to get to the top. And I realized that we do a lot of planning around the collection and every other detail, but there wasn't planning for what happens with the data. And that has become increasingly important and challenging as we've gone through time, and is being driven by where we are now in the digital and data transformation. And as John talked about, this LLM movement, right? And to be able to do that in any meaningful way beyond research and a technology standpoint, but to implement it, to bring that in, the capabilities in, to help that data-centric experience we're trying to create for our end user, and to be able to have those models that we can train, to be able to build in some reality, to make sure and ensure that we are able to achieve that at speed and scale and securely, right? While also adhering to our compliance and our privacy and civil liberties. That comes down to one thing, and that is a plan for the data that also includes tagging and labeling and getting that quality data, but also the data so it can protect itself as it goes through. So when I started digging into this and really looking at how we do the collection part or the acquisition of data, right, whether it's open source or commercially available, there was no planning for it, right? There's no assessment of what is the actual classification? Why are we using the most exquisite collection means for some of this data when it's and transport and ingest when it's actually unclassified at that point, right? So being deliberate and intentional about how we think about the data and planning for it. We've got a case where we're sitting here now where the cost of compute and storage on our data, the volumes of the data. There's a lot of business decisions to be made about how we handle the data all the way through from end to end that impact our ability to then execute and deliver and implement on the AI capabilities that are coming. And so that's why I came in, and the IC data strategy really focuses on that point and the idea of planning and really the idea that we are, and if we think of ourselves as a data organization, then we need to plan that way, prioritize resource, and we have not done that. And so that's why I really focused on that. And it's very intentional to get data AI ready, where it's consumable by both humans and machines. And we can get in this, I could talk all day about this, but the thing about the work I've done with the DoD and CDAO, where we've signed 2 memos to end the ontology wars. And when I talk about ontologies in the meetings I go in, other than with Bruce, everyone glazes over. But critical, right? If we want to get to a place where we're doing data standardization across 18 elements, and we're looking at the interoperability piece, and actually having our data where it's consumable by both humans and machines. There's a lot of work that has to be done, and we're on that track. So,
thanks. Panelists, anything to add or?
Yeah, I'll just say go back 10 years. And the sort of emergence of the phrases like it's all about the data, free the data, data is a strategic asset, right? All of those phrases that we kind of repeated to each other, locked arms, and we're like, let's do this. In a way, those were very prophetic, right? Without starting that then, without the emergence of the cloud, without the emergence of high-performance computing, without the emergence of massive object storage, we would not be here with AI today, right? OpenAI and all the Anthropic and the companies that did this would not be here without sort of that initial, and especially the government, without that initial focus on philosophically, prophetically, trying to announce this into the wilderness and will it to happen. Luckily, right, we had IC, CDO established, the different agencies established the CDOs. They're still not fully enabled, right? Lori, you will say that. There's still a lot of work to do to convince leadership of the community how important this concept is. But luckily, this AI energy is going to force a lot of these philosophies that we put out in front to happen.
I would agree with all of that, except perhaps for the word prophetic, and that's simply because I have been involved in this for 30 plus years, and my reaction was, it is about time. It has always been the case that high quality data is necessary, whether it's an analyst looking at it, whether it's a traditional analytic, or now AI. The thing that's really changed to me is not the fundamentals, the need to do this, but really the consequences of not doing it right, the importance of doing it really effectively. All of that has been dialed up to 11, and I am really looking forward to the conversation today to figure out how we can progress data management, and its support of AI.
Terrific, thank you. So question 2, what challenges and opportunities are we seeing when it comes to AI implementation in the IC from a data viewpoint? Mark, I'm going to start with you because of Maven, where I think there's some actual experience that is relevant to that question.
Yeah, so if we go back to sort of the beginning of Maven, 2017, 2018, there was a lot of work initially developing models, getting that rolling, and then the realization that we did not have enough data, right, to actually build quality models. So that was a little bit of wake-up call for the program, and then from that, a lot has changed and emerged sort of to get us there. Much of the Maven activity, holistically, is doing data labeling and data management, collation of data, pipelining data, to be able to either build models, test models, and or manage the output of the models. But this problem, right, the problems that we're facing right now are still the classic problems in agency. There's still the tension between siloed data houses, siloed programs. Access controls are still very, they're sort of all over the place, and no one kind of knows where to go to get unified access. Now the problem is, now that we have working models, now that we have a massive, valuable amount of data labels and a massive amount of detections that are coming out of these models, now the challenges are, well, how would we share that with another IC agency? How do we share that with an international partner? These policies have not been written yet. And the way one keeps track of like a data label all the way to a detection, the lineage that you need to be able to do quality assurance and to be able to do, in case you need to manage those labels in a way, either to delete them, edit them, manage them, let your consumers know that those are no longer valid. All of these are new problems that we haven't experienced yet that are sort of, slapping us in the face, keeping us awake at night in terms of how we move into the future. So I think all the other agencies that are working on this, these are emerging problems that everyone's starting to face.
Thanks, Mark. Bruce, thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say they're new in the sense of the importance and the scale of the problems. We've always had mechanisms to share data. We've always worried about data. They have historically, going back decades, been largely manual. And now we're at a place where we absolutely need automation to function at the scale that we face. AI-ready data is a new term. Data product coming out of data mesh is a new term, but the concepts behind those terms, what ultimately is needed to deliver high-quality data, none of that has really changed conceptually. We need to better automate the discovery of relevant data, and there are lots of efforts across the IC to do that using mechanisms like data catalogs. We need to make sure that the data can freely move between systems. That gets into the area of data tagging and zero trust, making sure that data describes its own security and compliance obligations, and that travels with the data and is not captured in individual systems. The data needs to be understood. We need to really reinvest in things like ontology, better documentation, data models, taxonomies, all the various ways we describe the semantics, the meaning of data. Data quality, pick your favorite enumeration of various data quality dimensions, completeness, accuracy, timeliness, et cetera, right? That is all really, really critical to make sure that these AI algorithms function the way we want. And ultimately, we do need to look at the policies and the processes that allow us to share this more seamlessly. We still run into situations where it takes far too long to get the right data to the right place. And these are all areas that Lori, Mark, we all toil in this space daily.
Brandy, from an industry perspective, any thoughts to add?
Yes, so many thoughts on this. And I just want to start by saying that I started by supporting you all in the Intel community as a data engineer. So this subject is near and dear to my heart. Even though I'm working in AI now, it goes back to some of the things that I want to echo that other people have said. You can't really separate the AI from the data. And when you try to do that, it becomes really problematic and difficult to get the results you're looking for. So I think a lot of what we're seeing from an industry perspective goes to some of the things that my colleagues on the panel have mentioned. But one of the challenges that we really see is the way that the contracting happens sometimes separates things that need to be together or at least coordinated from each other. And so there have been a number of examples that have happened recently where the compute is maybe in a different place from the development, and now you have an architecture that doesn't match the infrastructure, and it's really difficult and challenging for industry to meet the requirements when those sorts of things happen. So I think that there is a realization of this across at least everyone that I've been speaking with, like, oh, yeah, we understand that when we do that, it makes it really challenging for industry to respond to our requirements, especially in these big workloads that include very large amounts of data that need to be analyzed, cleaned, prepared, et cetera. So one of the things that we've been talking about with all of the folks that we meet with, and we meet with all of you, Mark and I were just talking about a meeting that is upcoming about this sort of thing, is really understanding the outcome that our clients and the folks in the Intel community are trying to drive. And rather than leading with technology, leading with what are you trying to solve? And I think that has been something in recent years that I've been really focused on in conversations with you all, to say, please help me understand what it is your end state needs to look like. What are you trying to accomplish for your analysts, your operators, your war fighters, any of those folks that are out there kind of on the front lines for us doing this work? And then we can work together with our tech partners, our partners in academia, our partners in the government to really give a nice holistic solution that will answer that. A lot of conversations we have is, oh, we need to do AI. And I really want to encourage all of us to say, okay, well, let's step back and say, what is it we're trying to accomplish that needs AI? And what are the data requirements for that? What are the infrastructure, cloud, on-premises requirements for that? And really make sure that we're starting with that end in mind and ensuring that we have put all of the right, one of my colleagues uses the word scaffolding, and I love it, right? All of the right scaffolding in place to get us to a situation where there is an end state where we are able to support you all and your end users in accomplishing the missions that they need to accomplish every day.
Lori, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, and one of the that's the biggest I think challenge that I've had is in talking all the way from the top leadership. So if we think of from the White House to our partners on the Hill, all the way down to the leadership across the IC, this push that has been of AI and talking about AI, and we know that there's the AI executive order, and all of that in there, the taking the step back, and with our industry partners, we've done a lot of partnering and look to see, how did that story evolve, but how it's presented is where they are today. And for us, that's not the same. And I talk a lot about we need to really, at this point, it's never been more critical to think about the plumbing and how we're going to get there and how did they get to where they are today, like back that up 7 years, right? And then figure out how do we close that gap. And then, so to do that, I've kind of started this digital C-suite concept, which we kind of have represented here today, where I'm working closely with the CIOs and the CISOs, because the zero trust architecture is going to be critical to all that, and understanding what that pathway looks like, and then how do we solve for those intersections to get us there, and work very closely on that. But also, how do we take a step back and ask those core questions? And I came up with a set of really, it's different tiers, but 5 smart data questions that should be asked by leaders when they're looking at what are we trying to do with the data, what intelligence gap are we trying to close, how we're going to do that, and then understand that all the way out. And so that's something that we just had the IC CDO offsite, and the deputies of the agencies came, and the principal deputy director, and the key actions for this year's action plan for the IC data strategy focuses on how do we build that into how we're thinking as we go forward, and then how we understand how we close that gap. And what do we really need to be investing in, and what's the total cost of ownership, right?
Yeah, that's a great segue to the next question.
Perfect.
Which is, what are the main concerns when it comes to AI and the security of component-specific data? What measures is the IC taking to address these concerns?
So if I understand right, so the security...
It's the security of the data that might prevent somebody with a siloed set of data to share. What's your thought on the sort of plumbing associated with the security, which is an important part of that?
So, I mean, both on the DoD side and the intelligence community side, there's a huge push, right, for zero trust architecture. I see that as a critical and core piece of this, and there's a data pillar to that. And I'm focused on making sure, like the data pillar, we talk about ZTA, and it's about protecting the crown jewels, where the crown jewels are the data. And if we don't know what data we have, and what are the actual what's in the data, how is that data tagged, and how do we, we have an IC data service that puts a guide ID, identifier on the data, so that it can have that provenance and lineage, but also that we know what data is in what system, and not that we have data in a system and that's the classification of the data, but we have to know the data, and then with other data, with other services of common concern that are out there, ICAM and other things, along with the ZTA, know your data, know your people, know the systems and the technology, right? But we have to have that full picture, and we need to be planning according to that, and then implementing on that. And then we can work like the rest of the world how we protect our data and use the technology to do that, right?
Yeah.
And not be afraid of the technology, but understand how to use the technology to help us achieve that.
Bruce, I think.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize, zero trust, the ability to associate with data the constraints that data needs to abide by, security and others, and then is foundational to allowing that data to move between systems, to be consumed by machines. All of this is in support of automation. We need the machines to have complete access to all the security and handling rules associated with data. On that latter point of handling rules, I kind of want to broaden the discussion a little bit from just security, because there's a lot of other handling rules associated with data. Privacy, compliance concerns, always front of mind in my day-to-day job. And those are often derived from the authorities, the laws, the policies that underpin why we are allowed to have the data and how we were allowed to use it. So that equally is something that needs to very much be tracked to be associated with data, because it's not just about the classic notion of using zero trust and sources and methods concerns, but also all of our obligations, all of them under the law in terms of compliance, appropriate use of data. And then I do want to kind of add, because there are some kind of very interesting, unique challenges in the AI space. They're not new, but that there's like new dimensions that AI brings into this. And one of them is really this notion of protection, security, due to compilation, where you can take multiple facts that themselves individually might not be particularly sensitive, but when combined are. When you're talking about how all of the implicit knowledge in these deep neural networks and these large language models pull all these things together, issues of compilation really start coming up in interesting ways. As, by the way, does the issue of how the various different authorities that might have underpinned the data come together, and what does that mean as far as how we need to treat the output of these models. And there's like very specific concerns with the mosaic effect as well that AI has brought on, especially in terms of our adversaries potentially using it, where we, very intentionally to maximize the sharing, the utility of our data, will remove facts that aren't necessary for a particular consumer. We are able to lower the classification when sharing that information. AI makes it so much easier if we were doing this to multiple different consumers to actually pull all this information back together again and kind of recreate some very sensitive concerns. And there's no easy solution to that. But it's just, these are some of the more interesting new angles that we're contending with in this era of AI.
Yeah, I'd say the irony is that these large language models were built on the corpus of the internet. And obviously, there's a lot of stuff on the internet that we don't need, check, or that is dangerous or harmful. It poses both security concerns and safety concerns. I remember talking to some of the frontier model developers, and questions like, does this model know how to build a biological weapon? They chose not to answer that. But obviously, if you are building the model on everything that you can get your hands on, you're going to have everything that you can get your hands on in the model. So that's where the work begins. That's where I think we've all seen the frontier model developers begin this very hard work of how do they either limit it coming in, or how do they limit it coming out, and how do they mitigate all of the potential danger that these models could inflict, not just on answering questions, which is what most of us today, right, are using these models for. Hey, give me an answer to this. But they're becoming agents of work, right? They can tap into databases. They can tap into APIs. They can write code to do conflation, convergence. They can come up with new result sets that will inform another API. They're agents of work now, right? And that's where the power will really be, will really be demonstrated over the future. And the drive will be to train the models with more and more and more information. What we'd like it is to be good information.
Well, that's a key point.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to.
Yeah. Next question, which is a good segue off that one, Mark. How is AI/ML helping the IC make sense of its enormous existing data holdings and tackle the challenge that the director of NGA, Vice Admiral Whitworth, previously termed as deluge control? And to add to that, mission organizations today are eager to deploy AI now to help with their use cases. How can they proceed with the data that they have ready access today while planning for the future? And it's this idea of field to learn. How do you get started with what you have to learn to then build on the future? So Mark, I'm going to have you start since this is based on NGA's leadership.
Yeah, kind of two questions there. The first one real quick. What a great time that we live in that an agency like ours will have too much data to exploit. Right? We'll have too much data to exploit. We already have too much data to exploit. Now let's just multiply that by a factor, many factors of what's going to happen over the next decade. So it's a great problem to have, but it's extremely difficult to solve. The only way for us to solve this problem, and for those of you that have heard Admiral Whitworth's speeches recently in the past 6 months, the only way obviously we can solve this problem is through automation. We're not going to have more people looking at more images. The best shot that we have in doing this is by developing really good automation, by using artificial intelligence, by developing the best computer vision models that we possibly can, that are the most accurate, right, that are great at positive identification, that are great at geolocation, and that can do it fast. Those are the sort of three vectors that we'll need to be able to have ubiquitous understanding of what's on those images as fast as we possibly can. So that's the big idea. That's the big picture. To kind of flip data on its head, we've mostly been talking about data that will feed models today. I'm talking about data that we will use AI to exploit moving forward. On the other thing, the specific question about Maven and Field to Learn, prophetic, I'm going to use it again. Let's go back to the days where we really, the CTOs and CIOs got together and said, we're not building software fast enough. We have the cloud now, but we're not doing good software engineering. Why don't we do what industry does? Why don't we do DevOps, DevSecOps? Why don't we develop and operate simultaneously? It's one of the coolest things about Maven. Okay, there's lots of cool things about Maven, but that is probably the most effective tenet of Maven, is to do DevOps. We push code every day, multiple times a day. We update software constantly while we're conducting operations, while we're doing mission operations. It's a brilliant thing. I love to see it in practice. Would love to see more of it in practice, where the commander of CENTCOM can be in the ops center and say, hey, I see this new data feed. Would you please do a correlation with this other data feed? Write me a quick application that I can see this differently on my big zip cop screen. And the developers do it right there on the spot. Push that code, put it in operations, and move forward. These are tenets that are like in the 2019 technology strategy that NGA put out there. For those of you that have been tracking that, this has to happen for our community. For us to be able to do ML ops, for us to be able to build new models and push those models, daily, it'll happen. To orchestrate models, we have to adopt that strategy.
Lori, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, everything he said, and so then take that across 18 for me, right? I'm interested in looking across the 18, and how do we get a handle on the data across the 18 that we make it available, discoverable, accessible, and that interoperability piece. So the opportunity is, as NGA's been on their journey, as CIA's been on their, all the the cloud journey, everything we're doing, right? I see you over there, Larry. All of that, we have to have the opportunity now, kind of mentality, to build some of this in for the interoperability. Also, it doesn't do us any good if we only think just at in the intelligence community. My role of working with the DoD, CDAO, and on the CJADC2 and all the work we're doing there. And then I lead the Five Eyes CDO forum. I say all that because there's not a single threat. The adversary we're against, everything we're doing, require the data that we're using and the decisions that we have to make and the insight we're trying to glean cuts across, right? Everything. And so we need to have that, lift our head up and look over and see, okay, so we're doing all of this with an NGA, but then how is that going to cut across? Because it's not just the work and how AI the place that'll put the workforce in the future is multidisciplinary, right? And how do we have our data in a place that is automated and available, because it's not just going to be, I'm no longer collecting it for one purpose, or we're generating it for one purpose. It has to go across, and so everything we have to put into place to make that happen.
I'd just like to highlight that, certainly our agency has always dealt with the deluge of data. That is not a new concept either. Now, granted, the scale keeps just getting amped up exponentially. But I've seen over my career the constant push and pull of new data sources coming online, new technologies that help us deal with it, like the cloud and now like AI. One of the first things we do when we're faced with the deluge of data is to see if we can improve how we filter the data that we even collect, how we select more precisely. And we have been deploying machine learning in that space for many years now. And these new technologies are very promising in allowing us to further look at how we can manage this massive amount of data, more on the analytic end. But of course, there's a lot of challenges as we work out how to deploy responsible AI. So one of the things, that we are very aggressively doing is prototyping, experimenting, learning, bringing the larger community together within our agency to look at what we can do with these new technologies. As kind of Brandy and others have mentioned, there are aspects of deploying successful AI that cut across all of the organizations, IT, data, security, legal, compliance, the various mission aspects. And deploying AI is very nuanced because it depends on the particular machine learning algorithm you're using, the particular data that's fed it. Highly curated data that generates very small, very selective models for filtering and selection is one end of a risk spectrum. Using large language models trained on data of unknown provenance to do general analytic tasks with various issues of hallucination and lack of explainability. That's kind of at the other end of the spectrum. So it's really essential that you bring all of the stakeholders together to make these decisions, and you look at each individual use case as an individual use case, learning over time the most effective ways to generalize and scale the decisions you make.
I'd like to add, I'm sorry, Lori, go ahead.
No, I just want to, just on Bruce's point, and we talk about the stakeholders, I don't want to miss the opportunity because of everyone who's here. And the third focus area of the IC data strategy is partnering with the private sector and academia, right? And we have really leaned into that. And we started, I think, on a Future Now series. We had one on, what does the future look like in immersive technologies and metaverse, right? Where we brought the private sector and academia together with officers from across the IC to look and see and envision what the horizons of the future look like and what we need to do now to optimize to get there. We had a data and AI summit where we had an industry panel and then we had an IC panel and then we went through again to see what do we need to be focused on, what do we need to do, how do we need to evolve our thinking. So I just wanted to make sure that we aren't missing the fact that we are also trying to pull from not only the lessons of the SIGINT community and others, but how do we bring in the industry and academic view to what we're doing. So thanks for...
No, please.
Which includes you, Brandy.
Yes, no, I was just going to add, I think it's so interesting as somebody who does support across all of you. I love the fact that you're all talking to each other because I felt in previous years where I might come in to talk to somebody in your agency and they'd be like, well, what are you doing over at CIA? And I'm like, well, you should probably talk to CIA. But I think a lot of what you were both alluding to that I just want to foot stomp is the fact that for many, and I've been working in AI for a long time, like my colleagues on the panel, but one of the things that has been really interesting over the past few years that I want to make sure we all kind of nod our heads to is we were all very focused 10 years ago about bringing AI to the end user, right? We were all super hyper-focused on what kind of AI can we put on the desk of an analyst to make that person do their job better, faster, whatever, right? And I think what we've been seeing in the past couple of years is, wait a second, and you talked about this a little bit, and I love this, we can use AI to actually enrich our data, to deduplicate our data, to do a lot of things to the data before it even gets to an analyst. So can we actually help them do their jobs better, faster, more effectively, et cetera, by giving them a better product to work with? And I think that we have seen a lot of that in the past few years. And I think from an industry perspective, it's a huge focus for us, right? Like, how can we use AI way left of an end user? And how can we make what they are taking a look at, what they're trying to analyze, et cetera, not be yet another application they have to click on and interact with to try to interrupt their tradecraft or their workflow that they're excellent at, right? So I think that foot stomping that is a really important thing to say because it is something from an industry perspective I'm being asked in almost every meeting.
Yeah, so next question, a little bit different variant on some of the issues we've already discussed. I started my career as an intelligence analyst, so this one kind of speaks to me. How does the use of AI in intelligence analysis affect the confidence or certainty of an assessment? Analysts have very, very, very structured ways of thinking about analytic tradecraft. But now when you introduce something like generative AI, for example, how do you know the provenance of data? How do you know to ascribe the confidence level with which that data should be used in analysis? What are your thoughts on this?
Bruce, why don't you go?
Well, yeah, I mean, so first of all, you absolutely have to solve this problem. That's not something you can wave away. You need that confidence. And, you know, how assured you can be of that confidence depends in part on, you know, the specific machine learning algorithm you're using. You know, ML really right now is being, you know, certainly in this conversation and out in the press, it's large language models, generative AI, these big models that do have challenges with explainability, with hallucination that are kind of challenging us. But there are other uses of machine learning where you don't actually have those problems. We absolutely have to solve these big problems before we can really deploy these large language models responsibly. As kind of John pointed out in his opening remarks, training is essential. You know, we need to make sure that our analysts understand what these AI models can and can't do. We need to make sure that the developers of those models clearly document what they can and can't do. We need to make sure that these models are maintained dynamically through their life cycles so that what they are intended to do when they were originally trained in response to the data seen at that time is still the case today. So all of these elements come together, you know, and of course I would be remiss on the data itself and its provenance. We absolutely, and this has always been important, you know, analysts, analytics, AI, we need to very thoroughly, in an automatic, machine-accessible ways, document the provenance of our data sources, keep track of them as data feeds analytics, feeds AI, and the cycle continues until we get the information products we need. All of that needs to be rigorously traced with standards across the intelligence community.
And that's what I'm laser focused on, right? Like, so, and a lot of people kind of glaze over what I've been talking about it, but now they're starting to see why this is so important, is that rigor that I want to put into data management planning. So for the first year of the action plan for the data strategy, all 18 elements came up with data management templates. The reason that is important is because for all new data, all of that rigor needs to be put into place so that the analysts and others can explain, right, where they got the data from. We have the Intelligence Community Directive 504, I'm happy to say, is in its final days of the XCOM review, which is, of course, the heads of the agencies. Once implemented, right, it talks about the fact that this will be required for all new data that is collected, acquired, or generated. I still care about the legacy data, and I want to use, you know, AI and other capabilities to go back on the legacy data. But for all new, we have to put this into place so that we can give that level of confidence, right? The other thing is, in the strategy, we talk about getting an IC workforce that is data-driven. I stood up an IC business analytics, right, so that we can even use our data about ourselves, right, within the IC, but also raise the acumen and literacy of everyone. But for analysts and targeters, they need data tradecraft. They need AI tradecraft. And I talk about the future of the workforce. We have 5 generations currently in the workforce, but the future workforce and ones that are already coming in are digital natives. And they will be across every discipline that we have. And so how do we bring that to bear so that they understand and can build this into what they're doing in their work every day? So,
thanks. So last formal question, and then we'll turn to the questions from the audience.
Yeah.
And this one starts with you, Brandy. So from an industry perspective, what are some of the guardrails that your organization is working on to ensure data and models are responsibly used on sensitive networks, particularly as Gen AI landscape is so quickly evolving? How do you think about offering solutions or capabilities that ensure data safety and security for the customers?
I love this question. I am very passionate about using AI responsibly. So I go back to the days when we all got excited about secure by design, when we were, you know, creating software, creating models, et cetera. And I think one of the key tenets in industry that we really need to stay focused on is not only are we secure by design, we're also trustworthy by design, we're responsible by design, we are very focused on ensuring compliance, and it goes back to some of the things that the fellow panelists have said. AI is a team sport, and what I'm finding is I spend a lot of time with attorneys. I spend a lot of time with very diverse pieces of both my government partners, but also in the company where I work, and this was the case when I worked at tech companies as well. We have to consider this a team sport, and we have to be bringing in our colleagues with different skill sets and their point of view. And one of the conversations I was literally just having yesterday was, okay, as we're doing some of these large language model deployments into sensitive government spaces, we're all figuring it out, right? There is emerging policy, right? You're alluding to emerging policy. There are emerging, I listen to legal podcasts. If you're not a lawyer, they can be very boring. But I listen to them because they're talking about emerging technology and what is happening from a legal perspective. Some of the ways that we might procure data, whether we purchase it or if we're bringing in a large language model that has been trained on something from the outside, there's a whole bunch of artifacts kind of associated with those models, right? Mm-hmm. So I think just being very cognizant of those things, bringing in your smart team members from the other places. One of the key things I think is really important, and I'm pretty passionate about doing this inside our own company, is I know John mentioned eating dog food. I like to say drinking our own champagne because I like champagne. So we do a lot of do it here first, where we have been working with large language models for a couple of years internally, serving our own workforce, where we are putting zero trust around it. We are putting different modules around it to test some of these things. Like, does it go outside the lines? And if it does, what does that look like? And how can we best advise our government partners on, just so you know, this might color outside the lines a little bit. We need to make sure that there's a wrapper around this. And so I think that as these things emerge and as we continue to test them internally, one of the things that I think both of you said was around prototyping. I think with generative AI, and again, there's a whole host of AI technologies that are the answer to most problems. I am as excited as everyone else is about generative AI, but I don't want to lose fact that we've got 50, 60 years worth of research, technology development, et cetera, that can solve most problems. And a lot of those things don't have the risks associated with them or the compute cost associated with them that some of the generative AI does. But generative AI can solve problems that some of these other things can't, right? So I think the prototyping, protected environments to try things out, trying things out against things that are more low risk, and really doing those proof points before we put it against mission critical data is something that I am very passionate about and always have those conversations with government partners.
So I'd like to transition in the time we have left to questions from the audience. So if you haven't already written your question and sent it forward, please do now. I've tried to consolidate and prioritize the questions the best I can based on what the discussion has been to date. I love this first question. In fact, Brandy and I talked about this during our pre-call. Is anyone looking at how to harness the use of AI on internal data for business processes such as financial acquisitions, HR data, talent management, security, to streamline and automate a lot of these processes that literally affect every single employee in the intelligence community? And if so, how is that sort of prioritized relative to some of the other initiatives?
Well, I mean, I can take a stab. So for the IC, like I mentioned, I think probably 3 or 4 months ago, I stood up an IC business analytics position, brought the person in, and what they're doing is going across the 18 elements. They've pulled together all the various resource or business officers into, and they've had, I think now 2 business analytic think tanks, the BAT, and we even had a Shark Tank, where we took some of those examples and some of the high priority areas where we can look and see what we can do across. One of the big ones is just even relative to where people work, in relation to where they live, in relation to buildings, right? And to understand all the data we have that could, build in flexibility, right? We can't always offer people the opportunity to, work from home, everything they're doing, but how can we use data and efficiencies, right? As far as time lost in commuting and everything else. So we took a lot of data, but we were using, bringing in and working with the AIM and Unity efforts to look and see how can we bring some of that to bear across even larger other business decisions that we're trying to make. And how do we have data reuse, when we collect data, and we have a lot of data, how do we make better decisions? Because even that data then tells us, even from a facility standpoint, how much unused space do we have on any given day, right? How do we consult with that before we go to look at making it a building or building a new facility or something? So how do we use the data we have across the services of common concern, across big contracts? All the work we're doing, there is a lot of data that we have that we could bring AI to bear on, and we are looking at how to do that.
I should have said too, I know we don't have a DIA representative on the panel today, but DIA has done a really interesting project under Janice Glover-Jones, looking at using automated AI for contract closeout, which is arguably you could apply AI to broader acquisitions, but contract closeout is for those professionals in that area, it's very time and labor intensive. It's very data intense, and they've got amazing stats on how that's improved the effectiveness of their acquisitions officers, their amount of time that they have to spend on this sort of endeavor. So those are some of the things that I think, I don't know, Mark, if
I'd probably say it at least once a day, right? And there's nothing mundane or bureaucratic about my job. At least once per day, I say, now that's a good use of AI.
Yeah.
Answering taskers, writing statements of work. Wouldn't it be nice if a model would go in and look at my weekly reports that I generate and make me a very nice performance rating report at the end of the year? That's something I would adopt immediately. Immediately adopt that. Maybe I'm a little skeptical about the computer telling me if this is a tell or not on an image, but I absolutely would adopt some of these more sort of mundane uses of a large language model.
Yep.
And I think everyone would.
Bruce,
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. I mean, there are multiple efforts across all of our directorates that are looking at how we can deploy these technologies to solve real world problems. It is very much a team sport, and that's driven home often by some of the novel suggestions for the use of AI that often come from like a technical or research perspective. And like HR folks, well, they won't say no. I mean, they're very promising, but they are absolutely essential in kind of saying, wait a minute, you've got to really think this through. I mean, using generative AI to write your promotion package, there are implications to this, to the fairness of that process that we have to think through very carefully. So it very much is a team sport.
I'm not saying I've actually done that, okay?
Laura, you knew you were going to get this question. Somebody has asked. You mentioned the 5 questions that leaders should ask about managing data. Can you tell us what those 5 questions are?
Oh, God, I was trying to remember them. I thought I had them memorized. But basically, the reason I've created this, right, is as, across the intelligence community, when a leader is presented with, hey, we've got this new, great, collection platform that we want to go up, right? Or we've got this new system, or we want to go in and get this, this area of commercial, data is really exciting for us. Well, first is, one is, what is the value of that to the intelligence community, right? And the second question would be, what intelligence gap is that going to fill? And then the third kind of question kind of gets at, well, what, why is this, is it classified across the way. Why we want to do, what's a better way to collect the data? Is there a different option than what you have? Do we already have the data, right? And then, so then it goes into like a level of questions about, well, who will need this data? You know, what's the timeliness of needing this data? Is it routine? Is, you know, just some basic data management questions that we haven't asked ourselves in the past. Because I sit in I've inserted myself, if you can imagine, in every aspect of where data comes up. And you know, there's a lot of programs across, the intelligence community, whether it be through, through satellite collection, other things, right? Human, whatever it is. SIGINT have done this for a long time. They've got a history of, you know, their journey started like 12 years ago. Either GOM, right? The reasons we're collecting it, some people have lost sight, you know, like some basic questions, right? But will drive how that data gets to where it needs to go and what's the actual classification. So just even asking kind of those 5 simple questions leads then to a discussion of, okay, so then it gets into the next level of what is the size of the data? Have we thought about, really, what is the retention of this data? What's the compliance? We know that up front. Like we can make a bending decision up front. Then things come into play. Then how long do we have to store the data? How long do we have to retain the data, right? And then how do we automate those decisions? Because that has huge implications from a cost perspective. So it's just those, and I can share the 5. We've shared the 5 questions with everyone. We can definitely share those if people want them. They can reach out to me.
I think that would be much appreciated with industry and academia who are trying to help respond to government needs to understand sort of what you see as the critical
Yeah, and it really started as the basis of what has become these data management templates that we're putting out, and that NRO and others have already started to implement on new things. And one of them is that question of AI. If we're looking at this XYZ platform that's going to come online in past 2030 or whatever it is, right? How are we thinking about how not only how can we use AI on the at ingest, but how can we even use it at the very point of collection, right? How do we make decisions now for something that's coming in the future is very important. And so and it goes back to we are a data organization, so anything that we do should have some fundamental questions that we ask up front.
So I've gotten the hook, but I'll ask one more question just because nobody's asked this, and I think it's important. Data labeling is a very labor-intensive, time-consuming issue that I know we've been discussing for years. You can't really outsource it to foreign nationals or foreign partners, but so what is the thinking now about how to do data labeling?
Well, I mean, I'd love for other people. I'll just say that's why we're building that in as part of the plan and try to do as much on all new, that just by the act of cataloging, right, all data, it forces that ability to do that. Now, I want to get to a place where we have enough where we can go back and do auto tagging to data, but we're not there, right? And this is why I talk about the fact that we just had this conversation yesterday, right? We talk about how critically important data and data management is, right? But if you look at the corresponding prioritization and resourcing required to do it, that is the total cost of ownership discussion we need to have. Because you can talk to any company out here, you can talk to the leading companies. I see some of you in here that I've talked to. It is very human in the loop still, right? I mean, I know some of our private sector partners have stood up full buildings where they have data quality specialists, data labelers, right? We're going to have to be creative about that and think about it, right? And the SIGINT community has, they address that, right? So now it's done in a much more automated way, but they've been on a longer journey, right?
Yeah.
We got to get the rest of them up to speed, right?
Well, although I do think, it's important that we understand, what these terms mean to different communities, which is why, the data management community within the IC, one of their first tasks was to create a lexicon of data management terminology, and the AI and the analytic community are doing similar things right now. But data labeling in our environment can mean a few different things. One of them is the labeling related to making sure that data travels with its security compliance obligations, that whole enabling foundational feature of zero trust. Another sense, and I can talk at length about that topic if you're interested.
have another panel
but the
on
other sense, you know, especially in this context, is probably in the training data sets for supervised learning and semi-supervised learning. That is not my area of expertise.
Yeah, well, we've been doing that for a while. We have millions and millions and millions of labels. Consider them a very valuable government asset. And in this case, for computer vision models, right, and with supervised and semi-supervised. We get a lot of pressure from folks thinking, haven't you labeled everything? Don't you have enough labels? And I have to remind those folks that we've only probably modeled and labeled maybe like, I don't know, like 3% of the world of the things that are important to label. We get a lot of pressure to say, why don't you guys use synthetic? We do use synthetic, right? But it doesn't sort of answer obviously it's mostly focused on things that we can't observe or can't see. And I think the future is, right, more automation, more few shot, more segmentation, all these sort of new techniques to be better, faster, and more complete at labeling. That is the future. But we will never take the human out of that initial phase of identifying something, right? That cognitive ability to say that this is what it is based on my expertise. We won't take the humans out of the test and evaluation of the models. We won't take the humans out of monitoring and manning the machine. That's a very, very important aspect of this. And then lastly, you know, we won't take the human out of the actual making sense of and use of the output of the models. That's another very basic sort of human piece of this. So while we sort of get this pressure, I'll say that we're just in the very beginning of one more thing. in this era of sort of human-machine teaming, I think the most important thing that we'll see in the IC is having the humans give more feedback to the models. It's not happening like it should today. People are busy with other jobs, like saving the country. But giving that feedback to those models will save our country.
Thank you. Well, on that note, I'd like to thank my panelists and all of you for listening today.